The first sensation was not one of life, but of falling. A bone-jarring metallic shriek filled his ears, the grotesque symphony of a speeding car and a fragile human body. He felt the phantom impact the splintering of bone, the final cold embrace of asphalt. Then silence. A deep, abyssal silence that stretched for an eternity. When Kalen Vance opened his eyes, the eternity had ended. He was not on a blood-soaked street. He was in a small, cramped room, lying on a narrow bed with a thin mattress. The air was stale thick with the scent of instant noodles and cheap laundry detergent. Sunlight, hazy with dust motes, streamed through a grimy window, illuminating a cheap wooden desk cluttered with textbooks. His textbooks. His breath hitched. He sat up, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His hands, when he held them before his face, were not the calloused, scarred hands of a man who had lost everything and fought for scraps. They were smooth, unblemished, the hands of a 19-year-old boy who had yet to know true hardship. This was his university dormitory room, a place he had not seen in 15 years, a place that had been the starting point of his ruin. His gaze swept across the room, a flood of memories crashing over him, each one a wave of agony. The worn-out sneakers by the door, the faded poster of a basketball player on the wall, and there on the desk, propped against a stack of books, was the epicenter of his destruction. A framed photograph of a smiling girl with bright, clever eyes and a deceptively innocent smile. Elora Vance. The name was acid on his tongue. In his past life, he had worshipped that smile. He had poured his family's fortune into it, funded her education, supported her dreams, and shielded her from every hardship. He had been her benefactor, her protector, her fool. And in return, when his family's empire crumbled, she had drained the last of his value and cast him aside like garbage. Her final words to him as she walked away with another man echoed in the silent chamber of his reborn mind. "You were always just a stepping stone, Kalen. A very generous, very stupid stepping stone." The memory of the car crash returned sharp and vivid. As he lay dying, bleeding out on the cold pavement, a figure had rushed to his side. It was not Elora. It was a girl he barely remembered from university, a quiet, studious girl he had occasionally helped with a small kindness. Her name was Serafina. She had been the only one to weep for him. His last thought had been a desperate, silent vow. If he had another chance, he would make things right. He would protect those who were truly kind and exact a terrible price from those who had wronged him. A cold, hard clarity settled over him, displacing the initial shock. This was not a dream. This was his second chance. The rage, the bitterness, the pain of a lifetime of betrayal coalesced into a single point of icy resolve. He looked at Elora's photograph again, but this time he felt nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness. The love he once felt was a dead star, its light long extinguished, leaving only a black hole of promised retribution. The door to the dorm room burst open without a knock, shattering the silence. Elora swept in her presence, instantly making the small room feel even smaller. She was exactly as he remembered, beautiful and vibrant, dressed in clothes far too expensive for a student. Behind her, smirking, was Dylan, the captain of the university basketball team. Her so-called white moonlight, the man for whom Kalen had been forced to play the fool. "Kalen, there you are," Elora said, her voice a practiced blend of sweetness and entitlement. She did not seem to notice his strange silence. Dylan's laptop broke. "You know how important his coursework is. The new Blazebook Pro just came out and he needs it. It's perfect for his design projects." Dylan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a look of casual arrogance on his face. "Yeah, man. Can't fall behind. You know how it is." Kalen felt a grim smile touch his lips. It was beginning. This exact moment. This was the first significant demand, the first thread in the vast, suffocating web she had woven around him. In his previous life, he had tripped over himself to agree, eager for her praise. He had immediately transferred the 30,000 yuan without a second thought. He remained silent, his gaze steady and unreadable. Elora's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She pouted, a gesture he once found charming. "Kalen, did you hear me? It's only 30,000. A drop in the bucket for you." Kalen slowly rose from the bed. He walked past her, ignoring the flicker of irritation in her eyes, and went to his desk. He picked up her photograph, his fingers tracing the cold glass. Then he turned to face them. "No," he said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. Elora blinked. What did you say?" "I said no. Kalen repeated, his voice devoid of any emotion. I will not be buying Dylan a new laptop. Dylan pushed himself off the doorframe, his smirk vanishing. Hey, what's your problem? My problem, Kalen said, turning his cold gaze on Dylan, is that I am not a bank. And even if I were, I would not approve a loan for such a frivolous purpose to someone with such poor credit. Alara's face flushed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This was not the Kalen she knew. The Kalen she knew was an obedient, lovesick puppy who lived for her approval. Kalen, what has gotten into you? This isn't funny. Dylan needs it. Then Dylan can get a job, or use a library computer, or ask his parents, Kalen said calmly. He opened the desk drawer, took out a small trash bin, and dropped Alara's photograph into it with a soft clink of glass against plastic. As for my money, I have decided to invest it more wisely from now on. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. A few other students, drawn by the raised voices, were now peeking in from the hallway. Alara's humiliation was palpable. You're cutting me off, she stammered, her voice trembling with rage. After everything your family has done for me, this is how you treat me. My family's generosity was intended to help a student in need, not to fund your boyfriend's lifestyle. Kalen replied, his voice still level. That generosity has officially been rescinded. Before Alara could unleash the torrent of fury building behind her eyes, Kalen turned and walked out of the room, pushing past the curious onlookers. He needed air. He needed to feel the reality of this new world to solidify the ghost of his past self into the Avenger he now needed to be. He strode down the crowded university pathway, his mind racing. The plan was not yet fully formed, but its foundation was solid: dismantle Alara's carefully constructed world, piece by piece, and build his own empire on its ruins. He would not just reclaim what was his. He would create something so vast and powerful that they would become insignificant specks beneath his shadow. Lost in thought, he turned a corner too quickly and collided with someone, sending a heavy stack of books tumbling to the ground. Oh, I'm so sorry, a soft voice said. Kalen looked down. Kneeling on the pavement, gathering her scattered books, was a girl with simple glasses and a plain, unassuming expression. But he saw past that. He saw the ghost of her face streaked with tears leaning over his dying body in another life. Serafina. It was my fault, he said, his voice softer than it had been all morning. He knelt to help her, his hands moving with a purpose that surprised him. He gathered the heavy volumes on economics and advanced finance. Of course, she had always been brilliant. As their hands brushed while reaching for the same book, she looked up, startled by his intensity. His eyes, she thought, were strange. They were the eyes of a young man, but they held the depth and weariness of someone much older, someone who had seen too much. They held a storm of emotions she could not begin to decipher. Thank you, she murmured, clutching the books to her chest as they both stood up. Be careful, Kalen said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than was polite. There are many people here who would not hesitate to walk all over you. He gave her a slight nod and continued on his way, leaving her standing there confused and flustered, a strange warmth spreading through her chest from his brief touch and his even stranger warning. Kalen did not go far. He went straight to the campus electronics store. He walked to the display featuring the brand new Blazebook Pro, the very model Alara had demanded. He bought it without hesitation, paying in full. News traveled fast in a university. By the time he returned to his dormitory building, the story of his public refusal had already become the subject of rampant gossip. As he walked back toward his room, a new laptop box in his hand, he found Alara and Dylan waiting for him, their expressions a mixture of fury and triumph. I knew you'd come to your senses, Alara said, a smug smile returning to her face as she saw the box. You just wanted to make a scene to feel important. Now give it here. We're late for... This isn't for you, Kalen said, cutting her off. He walked right past them, unlocked his door, and entered his room. They followed him in sputtering with indignation. What do you mean it's not for us? You bought the exact laptop I told you to. Alara shouted, her voice shrill. Kalen placed the box on his desk. He began to unbox it with methodical precision, ignoring her completely. He set up the sleek silver machine, the faint hum of its startup, a quiet declaration of war. My money, he said, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen. My property. I decided it was best invested in a brain that could actually appreciate its processing power. He logged in, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and confidence that seemed alien to the Kalen they knew. He opened a complex financial trading platform, the screen filling with charts, graphs, and rapidly fluctuating numbers. Alara stared dumbfounded. "What are you doing? You don't know anything about stocks." Kalen did not answer. He was no longer the boy from this timeline. He was a man who, in the depths of his poverty in the previous life, had obsessively studied the financial markets, learning their every secret, memorizing every major fluctuation and opportunity of the next decade. He knew which obscure tech company was about to skyrocket, which real estate bubble was about to burst, which cryptocurrency would make millionaires overnight. He took the 30,000 yuan he had intended to use for the laptop, the last significant amount in his student account, and poured it into a high-leverage trade on a volatile foreign stock he knew was about to surge. His movements were swift, decisive, and utterly ruthless. Alara and Dylan watched mesmerized and confused as the numbers on the screen began to change. The initial 30,000 yuan figure trembled, then climbed. It jumped to 35,000, then 40, 50, 100,000. Within the space of 10 minutes, the initial investment had multiplied tenfold, the account balance glowing with a number that made both of their jaws drop. Kalen leaned back in his chair, a faint predatory smile on his face as he closed the trading window. He turned to look at them, his eyes glinting with a cold light. As I said, he stated, his voice calm and lethal, a worthy investment. Alara stood frozen, the angry retort dying in her throat. The man in front of her was a stranger. The power radiating from him, the chilling confidence, the casual way he had just conjured a small fortune out of thin air, it was terrifying. For the first time looking at Kalen Vance, she felt a sliver of genuine fear. The game had changed, and she no longer knew the rules. The silence that followed their departure was heavier than any argument. Alara and Dylan had stumbled out of the room like ghosts, their faces pale masks of shock and confusion. The numbers from the laptop screen seared into their minds. Kalen did not watch them go. His focus was entirely on the silver machine before him, a conduit to a past he could now reshape. The victory did not bring him joy. There was no exhilarating rush, no triumphant cheer. There was only the cold, quiet satisfaction of a flawless calculation. This was not a game. It was an execution, and he was merely setting the board. The money, now a substantial six-figure sum, was a weapon, and a weapon was useless if left unsecured. With the same methodical precision he had used to unbox the laptop, Kalen began to move the funds. He opened encrypted channels, navigated through layers of digital security, and established a series of offshore accounts under a new, untraceable identity. It was knowledge he had paid for with blood and tears in his previous life, learned in the desperate years after his fall from grace, when he had to hide every meager earning from creditors and enemies. He left only a small, believable fraction in his student account. To the outside world, he had simply gotten lucky with a risky trade. To him, he had just laid the first brick of his new empire. His primary objective was revenge, but a close second was protection. He would not allow Serafina to suffer the same cruel fate that had befallen her in his previous life. He remembered hearing through the grapevine of gossip that she had been forced to drop out of university due to her family's financial troubles. Her brilliant mind wasted on menial jobs to support them. That would not happen this time. He found her where he knew she would be, tucked away in a quiet, forgotten corner of the university library, surrounded by towers of books. She was so engrossed in her reading that she did not notice him until he stood directly in front of her table. She looked up, and her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "You're the person from this morning," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Kalen Vance." He introduced himself, pulling out the chair opposite her and sitting down. The movement was smooth, confident, and it made her sit up a little straighter. "Serafina," she replied, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Is there something I can help you with?" "As a matter of fact, there is," he said, getting straight to the point. "My academic performance is lacking. I've spent more time on other pursuits and have neglected my studies. I've been told you are the top student in our faculty. I would like to hire you as my private tutor." Serafina blinked, taken aback. "A tutor, but there are official university tutoring programs. They're free." "I require a more dedicated and personalized approach," Kalen stated calmly. "And I am willing to pay for your time and expertise, generously." He named a sum, an hourly rate that was 10 times what a student could make at any part-time job. It was an amount so ludicrously high that it was impossible to ignore. Her eyes widened again, this time with disbelief. She looked from his expensive watch to his calm, serious face. That's a lot of money," she stammered. "Why would you offer so much?" "Because I value results," he said, leaning forward slightly. His gaze was intense, and she felt as if he were looking straight through her, seeing not just the shy library girl but something more. "I need to not only pass my courses but excel in them. I believe you are the only person here capable of helping me achieve that. Your time is valuable, Serafina. It should be compensated accordingly." She was intelligent, and her mind immediately raced through the possibilities. Was this a joke? A prank? Or was he, like so many other wealthy students, simply used to throwing money at his problems, but his eyes held no trace of mockery? They were unnervingly sincere. The money would be life-changing. It would mean she could stop working her 2 exhausting part-time jobs. It would mean she could send more money home to her family. It would mean she could finally breathe. I would need to see your current coursework," she said, her practical nature taking over, "to see if I can genuinely help." Kalen slid a folder across the table. "Everything is in there. Take your time to decide. My offer stands." He stood up, gave her a brief nod, and walked away, leaving her with the folder and a racing heart. She opened it to find not only his syllabi, but also a neatly printed contract already drafted detailing the terms and the exorbitant payment schedule. This was not an impulse. It was a calculated, deliberate proposal. She looked at his retreating back, a deep sense of mystery and intrigue enveloping the quiet corner of the library. Over the next few days, the campus was a storm of rumors. Kalen's public rejection of Alara, his sudden stock market windfall, and his new cold demeanor were the subjects of endless speculation. Alara, for her part, tried to weather the storm with feigned indifference. She told her circle of friends that Kalen was just throwing a childish tantrum and would come crawling back soon. Her confidence was propped up by one upcoming event, the annual scholarship ceremony hosted by the Deep Corporation, his family's conglomerate. Her father, Trio Thon, was the director in charge of the Student Aid Foundation. Every year, Alara was publicly presented with the scholarship as a piece of performative theater, reinforcing her image as the benevolent, high-status daughter of a corporate executive. She believed this ceremony would be the ultimate rebuttal to the gossip, a public reaffirmation of her connection to the Deep family's power and wealth. The ceremony was held in the university's main auditorium. The air buzzed with the chatter of students and the self-important tones of faculty members. Trio Thon stood at the podium, a portly man with a smug smile basking in the perceived prestige of his position. He launched into a long-winded speech about corporate responsibility and the Deep Corporation's commitment to nurturing future generations. Kalen sat in the back of the auditorium, a silent observer. Serafina, having accepted his tutoring offer after 2 days of careful consideration, sat a few rows ahead of him, unaware of what was about to transpire. Alara was in the front row, looking radiant and confident. She beamed as her father spoke, waiting for her moment. And this year, Trio Tan announced, his voice booming, the recipient of the Deep Corporation's prestigious Vanguard Scholarship, a student who exemplifies both academic merit and a commitment to our community, is none other than my own daughter, the pride of our university, Alara Vance. A polite, practiced applause filled the hall. Alara stood up, smoothing her designer dress, a perfect smile gracing her lips as she prepared to walk onto the stage. "I object." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the applause with the sharpness of shattering glass. Every head turned. Kalen rose from his seat in the back, his expression calm, his posture radiating an authority that silenced the room. On the stage, Triuthan's smile froze. He squinted, trying to see who had spoken. When he recognized Kalen, his face went through a rapid series of emotions, annoyance, then confusion, and finally a dawning, sickening dread. He knew who Kalen was. He was not just some distant relative. He was the sole heir the young master, his own boss, answered to. The boy's presence here, playing the part of a normal student, was part of a family arrangement Triothan was not supposed to fully understand, but was ordered to respect. And the look in Kalen's eyes was not that of a lovesick boy. It was the look of a predator. "Mr. Vance," Triothan said, his voice suddenly strained. "This is a formal ceremony. Please take your seat." Kalen began to walk down the central aisle, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence. I am afraid there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding this scholarship director trio. He said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the auditorium. And I am here to correct it. He reached the front of the stage, standing directly below the podium, and looked up at the sweating man. The Vanguard Scholarship is not funded by the Deep Corporation's General Philanthropy Fund. It is funded by a private trust, the Vance Benevolent Fund. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Kalen's eyes locked onto Trio Than's. It is my personal trust fund established by my grandfather for a single purpose: to quietly sponsor one deserving student from a disadvantaged background through their entire university education. It was meant to be anonymous, a genuine act of charity, not a tool for public relations. His gaze shifted to Alara, who stood frozen halfway between her seat and the stage, her perfect smile now a grotesque grimace of horror. For the past 2 years, Director Trio, you have misused that trust. You have presented my private funds as a corporate award and bestowed it upon your own daughter, who, as you and I both know, is the very definition of a student in need. You turned my family's charity into a stage for your own vanity and her deception. The gasps from the students were audible. Alara was not a benefactor. She was the beneficiary. The rich girl everyone envied was in fact a charity case. Therefore, Kalen announced, his voice ringing with finality. Effective immediately, I am revoking the scholarship from Alara Vance. The fund's resources have been egregiously mismanaged and its spirit violated. He then turned his eyes, scanning the crowd until they found Serafina. She was staring at him, her face a picture of utter shock, her knuckles white where she gripped her books. The board of my trust has reviewed the academic records of all students in this faculty. Kalen continued, though he was the only board member. And we have chosen a new recipient, a student whose dedication, brilliance, and integrity are beyond reproach. A student who has worked multiple jobs to support herself and her family while maintaining the highest grades in her class. The new and rightful recipient of the Vance Benevolent Fund Scholarship is Miss Serafina. All eyes swung to Serafina. She shrank in her seat, the sudden, overwhelming attention pinning her down. It was impossible. How could he know about her family, about her jobs? Trio Than stood on the stage, pale and trembling, looking as if he might collapse. His career, his reputation was evaporating before his eyes. Ilara's world had been turned completely inside out. The foundation of lies upon which she had built her entire university identity had just been demolished by a nuclear bomb. In the crowd, Dylan quietly took a step back, subtly distancing himself from the girl who was now radioactive. Ignoring the pandemonium erupting around him, Kalen walked over to Serafina's row. The students parted for him as if he were royalty. He stopped before her, the chaos of the auditorium fading into a dull roar. He extended his hand. "Congratulations," he said, his voice gentle for the first time. "You've earned this." Serafina could only stare at his outstretched hand, her mind reeling. The boy who had crashed into her, the mysterious student who had offered her a fortune to be his tutor, had just upended her entire life in the most public way imaginable. And in his eyes she saw not the arrogance of a rich boy playing games, but the quiet, unwavering certainty of a king placing a crown upon a deserving head. The fallout from the scholarship ceremony was not merely a storm of gossip. It was a seismic event that permanently altered the social landscape of the university. Alara Vance, once the untouchable queen bee, was now a pariah. The whispers followed her everywhere, a relentless chorus of mockery and scorn. Her story was no longer one of privilege and grace, but of deceit and humiliation. Friends who had once flocked to her side now avoided her gaze, their loyalty as shallow as the praise they used to offer. In the solitude of her room, stripped of her adoring audience, Alara festered. She did not feel shame or remorse. She felt a profound, burning sense of injustice. In her mind, the scholarship, the money, the adoration, they were all rightfully hers. Kalen had not exposed a lie. He had stolen her life. Her desperation curdled into a reckless fury. She refused to be erased. She needed to prove to everyone and to herself that she was still in control, that Kalen's actions were nothing more than a bizarre, lovesick tantrum from a spurned admirer. And so the idea of the birthday party was born. It would not be a small gathering. It would be a spectacle, a grand, audacious display of wealth and status that would scream her defiance to the entire university. She chose the most exclusive venue in the city, the Imperial Ballroom at the 5-star Emperor Hotel, a place synonymous with old money and untouchable luxury. The invitations were a masterpiece of manipulative subtlety. Printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, they announced a celebration of her 21st birthday. While Kaylin's name was not explicitly mentioned as the host, the event's sheer extravagance coupled with their long and public history created an unmistakable implication. It was a public gauntlet thrown down. She was betting everything on a single belief that the old Kaylin, the boy who would do anything for her, was still lurking beneath that cold exterior, and that his pride would not allow him to publicly refuse her in such a grand setting. She was forcing his hand, confident that he would rather pay the price than suffer the social shame of being seen as petty. The invitation arrived during one of Kaylin's tutoring sessions with Serafina. They were in a private study room in the library, the air filled with the quiet scratch of her pen on paper as she explained a complex economic theory. Kaylin, for his part, was an unnervingly fast learner. He absorbed information with an intensity that both impressed and slightly intimidated her. A courier delivered the sleek envelope. Kaylin opened it, his face betraying no emotion as he read the contents. He slid it across the table to Serafina. She read it, and a worried frown creased her brow. "This is a trap, Kaylin." "Of course it is," he said, his voice calm. "She wants to force you into a corner." Serafina continued, her analytical mind piecing it together. "If you go and pay, you prove she still has control over you. If you don't go, she'll spin it as you being cruel and vindictive. She's trying to reclaim the narrative." Kaylin felt a flicker of warmth. In his past life, no one had ever seen through Alara's manipulations on his behalf. No one had ever tried to warn him. Serafina's genuine concern was a balm on a very old wound. "Her narrative is irrelevant," he said. He looked at her, his gaze direct. "But I will be attending. And I would like you to come with me." Serafina's eyes widened. "Me? But I wouldn't fit in at a place like that. It's not my world." "I'm making it your world," he said simply. "I am not asking you to be my guest, Serafina. I am asking you to be my partner for the evening. It's time people saw you not as the recipient of a scholarship, but as the formidable woman you are." Her heart fluttered at his words. Before she could protest further, he had already made the arrangements. The following evening, 2 hours before the party, a team of stylists arrived at her modest off-campus apartment. They came with a gown of deep sapphire silk that seemed to drink the light, a case of delicate diamond jewelry, and the gentle professional air of people who worked miracles. When Serafina looked in the mirror hours later, she did not recognize herself. The shy, bookish girl was gone. In her place was a woman of breathtaking elegance and poise. The dress fit her as if it were spun from moonlight and midnight, and the diamonds at her throat glittered like captured stars. The transformation was so complete, it brought tears to her eyes. It was not the luxury that moved her, but the startling realization that this person, this elegant woman, had been inside her all along. Kaylin had not given her a costume. He had given her a key. Their arrival at the Emperor Hotel was a moment of pure theater. The ballroom was already filled with a mix of students, socialites, and hangers-on who had flocked to the promise of free-flowing champagne. Alara stood near the entrance, a vision in a glittering gold dress holding court. She was laughing a little too loudly, her eyes constantly darting towards the door. Dylan stood beside her, looking uncomfortable, but unwilling to miss out on the opulence. Then the doors opened and Kaylin and Serafina entered. A hush fell over the room. Kaylin was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that made him look older, sharper, more dangerous. But all eyes were on the woman on his arm. Serafina moved with a newfound grace, her initial nervousness melting away under Kaylin's steadying presence. She was not just beautiful, she was luminous, possessing an aura of quiet intelligence and dignity that made Alara's glittering facade look cheap and brittle in comparison. Alara's smile tightened a barely perceptible crack in her mask of composure. She approached them, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Kaylin, you came and you brought your tutor. How studious of you." "Serafina is my partner tonight." "Alara Kaylin," replied, his voice cool and clear, loud enough for those nearby to hear. He met her gaze, and for a second she saw the abyss that had opened in his eyes. It's important to surround oneself with people of substance. The barb hit its mark. Throughout the evening, Alara tried desperately to regain control. She flitted from group to group, dropping hints about her father's influence, about Kaylin's supposed obsession with her. But the center of gravity in the room had shifted. People were drawn to Kalen's quiet power and mesmerized by Serafina's understated elegance. Kalen, for his part, played the role of a passive guest perfectly. He drank champagne, engaged in light conversation, and treated Serafina with a gentle, focused attention that made it clear to everyone where his priorities lay. He allowed Alara to believe she was winning, letting her build her pedestal higher and higher, knowing the fall would be that much more spectacular. Finally, the moment came. The band quieted, and Alara stepped onto a small stage, tapping a glass for attention. A triumphant, radiant smile was plastered on her face. She felt she had weathered the storm. Kalen was here. He had brought his new pet, but he was still here in her orbit. The night was a success. "I just want to thank you all for coming to celebrate with me tonight," she began, her voice ringing with confidence. "It means the world to me to be surrounded by such wonderful friends." Her eyes found Kalen in the crowd, "And I especially want to give a special thanks to someone whose loyalty and unending generosity have always been a constant in my life. Thank you, Kalen. This magical night wouldn't be possible without you." The implication was clear. He was her benefactor, her provider, the source of this splendor. She was publicly reclaiming him. The trap was sprung. As the guests began to applaud, Kalen raised a hand. The applause faltered and died. He looked up at Alara, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "You're absolutely right, Alara," he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "This night wouldn't be possible without me. And since it's your birthday, I have one more surprise for you." He gestured towards the main entrance. The doors swung open and the hotel's general manager, a stern-faced man named Mr. Harrison, walked in. He was flanked by two men in sharp suits who had the unmistakable air of corporate lawyers. "Mr. Harrison, so good of you to join us," Kalen said pleasantly. Alara stared, confused. "Kalen, what is this?" "Mr. Harrison has some exciting news he'd like to share." Kalen continued, ignoring her. The general manager stepped forward, his expression grim. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for the interruption. I am here to make a formal announcement. As of 4 p.m. this afternoon, the Emperor Hotel Group, including this establishment, was officially acquired in a majority share purchase by DV Enterprises, a private equity subsidiary of the Deep Corporation. A wave of stunned murmurs swept through the room. Mr. Harrison then turned his gaze towards Kalen and gave a slight, respectful bow. "And I would like to introduce you all to the representative of our new ownership, who has been appointed to the Transitional Board of Directors, Mr. Kalen Vance." The shock in the ballroom was absolute. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Alara's face went completely white, her triumphant smile frozen in a rictus of horror. Kalen stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from that of a guest to one of cold executive authority. "Which brings us to the matter of this party," he said, his voice sharp and businesslike. He held up a tablet, its screen glowing. "Our legal team has just reviewed the booking for the Imperial Ballroom tonight. It appears the reservation, along with a significant line of credit for services, was secured using my name and my family's credentials without my authorization. In legal terms, that constitutes fraud." He looked directly at Alara, whose entire body had begun to tremble. "Therefore, the new management does not recognize any prior payment arrangements or lines of credit associated with this event. The full and final bill for the venue, catering, beverages, staff, and entertainment for 200 guests is now due. Immediately." Mr. Harrison made a crisp gesture. A waiter in a pristine uniform walked forward and presented a leather-bound bill folder to Alara. He placed it in her trembling hand. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the astronomical figure at the bottom, and a small strangled gasp escaped her lips. The party was over. The music had died. Her so-called friends began to discreetly back away, melting into the shadows, their faces averted. Dylan was already halfway to the exit. The grand ballroom, moments before a symbol of her triumph, had become her prison. Discreet but unyielding hotel security guards materialized near the doorways. Kalen did not spare her another glance. He gently placed a hand on the small of Serafina's back. "Shall we?" he murmured. He guided her out of the ballroom, leaving Alara standing alone on the stage, the spotlight still on her, illuminating her silent, screaming terror. She was trapped in the gilded cage she had so arrogantly constructed, left to face the crushing weight of a debt she could never hope to pay. The ride back from the Emperor Hotel was silent. Serafina, wrapped in a cashmere throw Kalen had retrieved from the car, occasionally stole glances at him. He drove with an unnerving calm, his profile illuminated by the passing city lights, his expression as serene as if they were returning from a quiet dinner, not the calculated demolition of a human being's social existence. She had witnessed his cold fury, his strategic brilliance, and his quiet tenderness all in one night. The man beside her was an enigma, a puzzle of contradictions that both fascinated and frightened her. For Alara, there was no quiet ride home. She was detained for hours in a cold, sterile management office, subjected to the polite but unyielding pressure of hotel security and legal counsel. The astronomical bill sat on the table before her like a death sentence. Her frantic calls to friends went unanswered. Dylan had texted her once a curt, dismissive message wishing her luck before blocking her number. Her salvation, if it could be called that, came in the form of her father. Trio Tan arrived looking haggard and defeated. There was no negotiation. As the man who had facilitated the fraudulent use of the Diep Corporation's name, he was implicated. To avoid immediate legal action, he was forced to sign a personal debt agreement, leveraging his salary, his pension, and his home. He effectively sold his future to Kaylin Vance to pay for his daughter's folly. The drive back to their modest apartment was filled with a toxic, simmering rage. Trio Tan did not yell. His voice was a low, venomous hiss. "You foolish, arrogant girl," he seethed, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. "You thought you were playing with a puppy. You poked a sleeping dragon. He humiliated me." Dad Alara shrieked, the tears she had refused to shed at the hotel now streaming down her face. "He destroyed me in front of everyone. He destroyed me!" Trio Tan roared, slamming his fist on the dashboard. "My career, my savings, everything I have worked for is now in his hands. He holds the leash, and we are the dogs." They arrived home to their cramped apartment, the stark reality of their situation closing in. The facade was gone. They were not corporate royalty. They were two desperate people teetering on the edge of an abyss. It was in that crucible of fear and hatred that a new, more dangerous plan was forged. "He plays with power," Trio Tan whispered, his eyes glinting with a mad cunning. "But he is still just a boy. The elders on the Diep Corporation's board. They are old crocodiles. They value stability. They despise scandal. A reckless heir is a liability." Trio Tan had worked in the finance department for over 20 years. He knew the systems. He knew the protocols. He knew where the vulnerabilities were. "He thinks he is untouchable." He continued, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "But every god can be made to bleed." The attack began subtly. An anonymous email sent from a Proton mail account landed in the inboxes of two of the most conservative elders on the Diep Corporation's board of directors. It contained a carefully doctored expense report, seemingly from Kaylin's student trust fund, detailing absurd expenditures, vintage wines, gambling junkets, extravagant gifts for a string of unnamed women. It painted a picture of a dissolute, irresponsible heir squandering his family's resources. A few days later, a post appeared on a popular financial gossip blog. It was a leak of internal transaction logs showing large sums of money being moved from a low-level corporate account into Kaylin's personal one. The logs were forgeries, of course, but Trio Tan's skill was in making them look plausible. He used real transaction codes and routed them through obscure clearinghouses, creating a digital paper trail that would take weeks for a proper forensic audit to unravel. The narrative was clear and poisonous. Kaylin Vance, the hidden heir, was not just a playboy. He was a thief, embezzling company funds to finance his petty campus rivalries and decadent lifestyle. Kaylin was aware of the campaign the moment it began. His network, the one he was secretly building with his newfound capital and future knowledge, alerted him to the blog post and the whispers circulating in the corporate world. He was not surprised. In his past life after his downfall, he had seen firsthand how vicious a cornered man like Trio Tan could be. The corporate world was a battlefield, and a reputation was a fragile shield. Even as the heir, he was not immune. The elders of his family, particularly his staunchly traditionalist great-uncle, would not tolerate such a scandal. This was a direct threat to his long-term plans. During their next session, it was Serafina who brought it up. She looked more troubled than he had ever seen her. "I've been hearing things, Kaylin," she said, pushing a textbook aside. "Ugly rumors. Not just around campus. I saw a post online." Kaylin looked at her, his expression unreadable. He had come to value her insight more than she knew. He made a decision. He opened his laptop, navigated to the anonymous blog post, and turned the screen towards her. "This, you mean?" She read it, her brow furrowed in concentration. The article was slickly written, filled with financial jargon, and accompanied by screenshots of the forged transaction logs. To a layperson, it looked damning. "This feels wrong," she said after a long moment of silence. She pointed to a line item on one of the logs. "This transaction code, it's for an interdepartmental asset transfer, not a withdrawal to a personal account. It's been miscategorized. And look at the timestamp, 3:14 a.m. The clearinghouse it was supposedly routed through doesn't process transactions between 2 and 4 a.m. due to system maintenance." Kalen watched her, a sense of profound affirmation washing over him. He knew they were forgeries because he was from the future. She knew they were forgeries because she was brilliant. Her mind was a finely tuned instrument cutting through the noise and seeing the flawed logic beneath. "The expense report is also a fake." She continued, her confidence growing. "The formatting for the date is inconsistent. European style here, American style there. And this merchant code for a vintage wine purchase in Macau, it actually belongs to a logistics and shipping company in Hong Kong. It's sloppy. It's meant to look convincing at a glance, but it falls apart under scrutiny." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with intellectual fire. "Someone is trying to frame you, Kalen. And they're good enough to fool most people, but not good enough to fool a real audit." "An audit takes time," Kalen said. "By then the damage to my reputation could be done." "Then we don't wait for an audit," she declared, her voice firm. "Let me look deeper. I have access to academic financial databases and analytical software. I can build a case that proves these are forgeries. We can fight back with facts." In that moment, their relationship transformed. She was no longer just his tutor. He was no longer just her mysterious benefactor. They were partners, allies in a silent war. Meanwhile, Ilara and Triothan grew impatient. The corporate attack was a slow burn, and they needed a fast, decisive victory to cripple Kalen's credibility on campus, where the immediate social battle was being waged. They needed to attack his character, his masculinity, his honor. Their chosen weapon was Dylan. The university gymnasium was the heart of its social life, and Dylan, as the basketball captain, was its king. He was a hero to many, his athletic prowess, granting him a level of admiration that wealth alone could not buy. Ilara saw the perfect opportunity to leverage this. The confrontation happened at midday in the crowded student plaza. Kalen and Serafina were walking back from the library when their path was blocked. Dylan stood before them, not in his usual smirk, but with a look of righteous anger. He was flanked by Ilara and several members of the basketball team. A crowd quickly gathered. "Vance," Dylan said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We need to talk." Kalen stopped, his expression neutral. "I have nothing to say to you, Dylan." "Oh, I think you do." Dylan shot back, emboldened by his audience. He held up his phone, displaying the gossip blog article. "I've been reading some interesting things about you, about where you get your money. Seems you're not just a rich kid. You're a thief." Kalen's eyes narrowed slightly. Serafina put a warning hand on his arm, but he gave a slight shake of his head. "You believe everything you read online?" Kalen asked, his voice laced with contempt. "I believe that a real man doesn't hide behind money and lawyers," Dylan declared, puffing out his chest. Ilara had coached him well. "You humiliate people, you throw your weight around, but you've never accomplished anything on your own. You're a coward who pays his way through life." He pointed a finger at Kalen. "So I'm going to give you a chance to prove you're not. Me and you, one-on-one. A game of basketball right here in the main gym in 3 days. No money, no tricks, just skill." He then delivered the final crucial blow, tying it all together. "And here are the stakes. If you win, I'll publicly declare that these rumors are baseless lies. But if you lose, if I beat you, you will stand up in front of the entire student body and admit that every single accusation of embezzlement is true." The crowd gasped. It was a brilliant, vicious trap. Basketball was Dylan's domain. He was a celebrated athlete, while Kalen was known for being bookish and reserved, never having shown any interest in sports. To refuse the challenge would be seen as a tacit admission of guilt, confirming the cowardice Dylan accused him of. To accept seemed like a fool's errand, a guaranteed public humiliation that would cement his reputation as a fraud. Ilara watched from behind Dylan, a smug, triumphant look in her eyes. She had him. Either way, he would lose. All eyes were on Kalen. The plaza was silent, everyone waiting for his response. He stood motionless for a long moment. Serafina's grip on his arm tightened, her knuckles white. Then a slow, cold smile spread across Kalen's face. It was a smile that did not reach his eyes, which glinted with the chilling light of a predator that had just seen its prey walk willingly into an open snare. He looked past Dylan, his gaze locking with Alara's. "You should have stayed down after the party, Alara," he said, his voice quiet yet carrying a clear threat. Then he turned his attention back to Dylan. "Fine, I accept your challenge." The 3 days leading up to the basketball match were a fever dream of campus-wide anticipation. Kalen Vance versus Dylan became the sole topic of conversation, a modern-day duel that promised a spectacle of epic humiliation. Bets were placed, sides were chosen, and the overwhelming consensus was that Kalen was walking into his own execution. Dylan fed the frenzy with relish. He held loud, ostentatious practice sessions in the main gym, effortlessly sinking three-pointers and executing slam dunks for his adoring fans. He was the picture of arrogant confidence, a campus god certain of his invincibility in his own temple. Ilara was a constant presence by his side, her smugness restored, acting as both cheerleader and campaign manager for Kalen's impending downfall. In stark contrast, Kalen was rarely seen. He attended his classes, continued his tutoring sessions with Serafina, and projected an aura of unnerving calm. This quietness was misinterpreted by most as fear, a man retreating into himself before his public shaming. They could not have been more wrong. His real work happened late at night. In the solitude of a dimly lit private basketball court he had rented in the city, the true Kalen emerged. The clumsy, bookish student persona melted away, replaced by a machine of fluid motion and lethal precision. In his past life, after losing his fortune and his family, his body had been the only thing he had left. He had thrown himself into grueling physical discipline, not for sport, but for survival. Basketball had been his only escape, a place where he could channel his rage and grief into something pure and kinetic. For years he had played on cracked asphalt courts against hardened men who played for money and pride. He had learned the game in the crucible of desperation. Dylan, with his coddled university training, was a child playing with a toy sword. His other work happened with Serafina. Their study sessions had transformed into a war room. Serafina, fueled by coffee and a fierce sense of justice, was a whirlwind of forensic analysis. She cross-referenced IP addresses, analyzed metadata from the leaked images, and compiled a timeline so precise it could pinpoint the exact moment Triothan had created the fraudulent documents on his office computer. She had found the digital fingerprints, the undeniable proof of his conspiracy. "It's done," she said on the morning of the game, handing him a sleek black data stick. Her eyes were tired but bright with triumph. "Everything is on here. It's irrefutable." Kalen took the stick, his fingers closing around the small piece of plastic that held the key to his victory. He looked at her, a rare, genuine warmth in his eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Just win the game," she said, a small, anxious smile on her lips. "The rest is just data." The main gymnasium was a roaring cauldron of noise and bodies. It was packed far beyond its official capacity, students filling every seat, every aisle, every inch of standing room. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn and anticipation. Dylan's supporters, a vast majority, chanted his name, their voices a unified, thunderous roar. Alara sat courtside, basking in the adoration, looking every bit the victorious queen presiding over the execution of her enemy. When Kalen emerged from the locker room, a wave of jeers and laughter washed over him. He wore a simple, unbranded black uniform, a stark contrast to Dylan's flashy team-issued gear. He ignored the crowd, his eyes scanning the stands, until he found Serafina. She gave him a small, determined nod. It was all the support he needed. The game began, as everyone expected. Dylan was a force of nature. He was bigger, stronger, and more aggressive. He scored the first 10 points unanswered, using a combination of powerful drives to the basket and arrogant showboating plays that sent his fans into a frenzy. Kalen, by contrast, seemed utterly outmatched. He moved stiffly, his shots were clumsy, and he was constantly on the defensive. The score was a lopsided embarrassment. Alara laughed, a triumphant cutting sound that echoed in the brief lulls. "Give up, Kalen," she shouted. "You're making a fool of yourself." But Kalen was not playing to score. He was gathering data. He was studying Dylan's rhythm, his preferred moves, his weaknesses. He was letting the arrogant captain exhaust himself on pointless, flashy plays, letting his ego swell to a critical, unsustainable mass. He saw the subtle tells. Dylan favored his right side. His long-range shots were inconsistent when he was tired, and most importantly, His temper was short. The turning point came midway through the game. The score was 24. Kalen had the ball. Instead of attempting a desperate long-range shot, he began to dribble with a new hypnotic rhythm. The clumsy movements were gone, replaced by a low-controlled grace. He faked right, and Dylan, overconfident, lunged for the steal. In that split second, Kalen executed a crossover so swift, so seamless, that Dylan was left staggering, his ankles metaphorically broken. Kalen drove past him and laid the ball gently into the hoop. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. It was the first time Kalen had shown a flicker of real skill. From that moment on, the game changed. Kalen was no longer just defending. He was dissecting. He used his superior court vision and intellect to anticipate Dylan's every move. He was not faster or stronger, but he was smarter, more efficient. He turned Dylan's aggression against him, drawing fouls, forcing turnovers. His own shots were not flashy, but they were relentlessly accurate. The score began to climb. 26, 28, 22, 10. Frustration began to eat at Dylan. His confident smirk was replaced by a snarl. He started playing dirty. A subtle elbow to Kalen's ribs, a knee during a rebound, a shove when the referee wasn't looking. Kalen had been waiting for this. He absorbed the cheap shots without complaint, but he made sure they happened in clear view, letting Dylan's unsportsmanlike conduct expose itself. The crowd's chants began to lose their fervor, replaced by a growing sense of unease. In the final 2 minutes, the score was tied. Dylan was red-faced, panting, his movements sloppy with exhaustion and rage. Kalen, by contrast, seemed almost untouched, his breathing, even his eyes cold and focused. With 30 seconds left, Dylan had the ball. He charged towards the basket, a desperate, bullish rush. Kalen stood his ground. Instead of trying to block the shot, he performed a perfect clean strip, stealing the ball from Dylan's hands as he went up. The crowd gasped. Kalen took possession and moved down the court. The clock was ticking down. 10 seconds. He did not rush. He dribbled to the three-point line, Dylan scrambling to catch up. 5 seconds. He stopped, turned, and looked directly at Alara, who was on her feet, her face a mask of disbelief. Then, with a fluid, effortless motion, he rose into the air. The ball left his fingertips just as the final buzzer sounded a perfect arc against the bright lights of the gymnasium. It sliced through the net with a clean swish. Silence. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the gymnasium. The Jumbotron flashed the final score. Kalen had won. It was not just a victory. It was an impossible, methodical dismantling of a campus hero. Before the crowd could process the shock, Dylan, his face purple with rage, charged at Kalen. "You cheated!" he roared, shoving him hard. "There's no way you could beat me. It's some kind of trick." Alara ran onto the court. "He's right. Kalen has been a fraud all along. He must have cheated." This was the moment. The final fatal error he had been waiting for. Kalen calmly walked to the announcer's table and took the microphone. His voice, amplified, echoed through the stunned silence. "You're right, Dylan," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Let's talk about cheating. Let's talk about honor and integrity." He nodded towards the control booth. Serafina, watching from the stands, pressed a button on a small remote. The massive jumbotrons that had been displaying the final score flickered and went dark. A second later, they lit up again, but not with game highlights. They displayed Serafina's presentation. The first slide showed the leaked expense report next to a genuine one with mismatched fonts and formatting circled in red. The next slide showed the forged transaction log with Serafina's annotations clearly explaining the impossible timestamps and the incorrect merchant codes. Slide after slide, a cold, irrefutable narrative of digital forgery and corporate slander unfolded. The final slide showed network data, tracing the origin of the anonymous emails directly to a computer terminal in the Diep Corporation's finance department, the one assigned to Director Triothan. The silence in the gymnasium was now one of pure, unadulterated shock. The students stared open-mouthed at the screens, the truth of the conspiracy laid bare for all to see. The scandal was not Kalen's embezzlement. It was the vicious, calculated attempt to frame him. The first wave of noise was not a cheer, but a low growl of anger from the crowd, now directed at the two figures frozen in the middle of the court. Kalen's voice cut through the rising anger. "The real game was never about basketball," he said into the microphone, his eyes locked on Alara. "It was about character. And today, everyone has shown their true colors." As if on cue, two university deans accompanied by a pair of stern-faced campus security officers walked onto the court. They bypassed Kaylin and approached Alara and Dylan. One of the deans, a grim-faced woman, spoke in a low but firm voice. "Miss Vance, your father has just been suspended from all duties effective immediately. The Deep Corporation's Internal Affairs Division is launching a full investigation based on this evidence." The world tilted under Alara's feet. It was over. Not just the game, not just the argument. Everything. Her father's career, her reputation, her entire house of cards had been incinerated in a blast of undeniable truth. Dylan stood beside her, pale and trembling, as the crowd's angry murmurs turned into shouts of "liar" and "fraud." Kaylin dropped the microphone on the table with a soft thud. He walked away from the center of the court, the seething crowd parting for him. He walked over to the stands where Serafina stood, waiting, her heart still pounding. He took the small data stick from her hand, his fingers briefly brushing hers. "Good work, partner," he said, his voice quiet amidst the chaos. Their victory was not loud or triumphant. It was silent, cold, and absolute. The gymnasium showdown became the stuff of legend. In a single afternoon, Kaylin Vance had transformed from a maligned outcast into an untouchable enigma. He was no longer just the rich kid who had inexplicably turned on his beautiful benefactor. He was a master strategist, a hidden athlete, and a ruthless truth-teller who commanded a terrifying degree of power. Respect and fear followed him in equal measure. Dylan, the fallen king, was suspended from the basketball team pending a code of conduct investigation. Alara, the twice-demolished queen, became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in dormitory hallways. The air of victory did not linger around Kaylin. For him, the game and its aftermath were not a conclusion, but a clearing of the board. Revenge was a finite, empty pursuit. It was the act of tearing down. Now it was time to build. His focus shifted entirely to Serafina. Their sessions in the library's private study rooms became less about tutoring and more like high-level strategy meetings. He saw in her not just a brilliant academic mind, but a visionary. The scholarship had freed her from the constant gnawing anxiety of financial survival, and in doing so had uncaged her intellect. She was more confident, her ideas sharper, her voice steadier. One evening after they had finished dissecting a complex case study on market disruption, she hesitated. "Kaylin," she began, a new kind of energy in her eyes. "There's something I've been working on. An idea. It's probably nothing but—" "Tell me," he said, his attention absolute. With a surge of courage, she laid it all out. It was an idea born from her own struggles, a mobile application, a platform that would use AI-driven tools to provide affordable, high-quality tutoring and educational resources to students from low-income backgrounds. It would democratize learning, breaking down the barriers that kept bright but poor students like herself from reaching their full potential. She had flowcharts, a preliminary business plan, and a detailed breakdown of the potential user base. It was not a student's daydream. It was a blueprint for a revolution. As he listened, Kaylin felt a sense of profound recognition. This was the kind of substance, the kind of world-changing potential he had once foolishly thought he saw in Alara's shallow ambitions. Serafina's dream was not about acquiring luxury. It was about creating value. "This isn't nothing, Serafina," he said when she had finished, his voice resonating with a conviction that startled her. "This is brilliant. This is the future." He didn't just praise her, he acted. Within a week, he had used his resources to make her vision a reality. He leased a small office space near campus, hired a team of talented young coders, and had his family's top legal firm draw up the incorporation papers. He provided the seed funding, a sum that made Serafina's head spin from his now considerable personal investment portfolio. The company was named Phoenix Innovations, and on the official documents, Serafina was listed not as an employee, but as the founder and chief executive officer. "This is your company," Kaylin told her, as she stared speechless at the signed papers. "My role is strictly as an investor on the advisory board. You are in command. This is your vision. I'm just providing the tools to help you build it." He was empowering her, not controlling her. He was giving her a platform, not a leash. For Serafina, who had spent her life fighting for every small opportunity, this act of absolute faith was more intoxicating than any declaration of love. She threw herself into the project, working with a passion and drive that amazed even Kaylin. It was into this new dynamic that the announcement for the annual Campus Bell competition landed. For years, it had been a glorified popularity contest, a parade of conventional beauty and shallow talents. It was Ilara's traditional hunting ground, and even now a pariah she saw it as her last stand. Delusional and desperate, Ilara believed her physical beauty was her one undeniable, unassailable asset. She announced her candidacy, hoping to salvage a single shred of her former glory, to prove that she was still at her core desirable. Kalen saw the announcement and saw not a threat but an opportunity, a final decisive one. He found Serafina at their new office where she was whiteboarding an algorithm with her lead programmer. She looked different now. She still wore simple clothes, but she carried herself with the authority of a leader. "I have a proposal for a new marketing initiative," Kalen said with a slight smile. "I'm listening," she replied, turning from the board. "I think the CEO of Phoenix Innovations should enter the Campus Bell competition." Serafina stared at him, then burst out laughing. "That's very funny, Kalen. I don't have time for something so frivolous." "I'm not joking," he said, his expression turning serious. "Think of it as a hostile takeover of a corrupt institution. For years that title has represented superficiality. It's been Ilara's crown. Imagine what it would mean if it was won by someone like you. Not because of your looks, but because of your mind, your character, and your vision. This isn't about winning a beauty contest, Serafina. It's about changing the very definition of value on this campus." She saw the strategic brilliance in his eyes and felt a thrill. It was a crazy, audacious idea, and she loved it. "Fine," she said, a determined glint in her eye. "But we do it my way." Kalen's campaign for Serafina was a masterclass in subtlety. While Ilara and the other contestants posted glamorous photos and pleaded for votes on social media, Kalen orchestrated a different kind of narrative. He arranged for the student newspaper to run a feature story not on the Campus Bell contestants, but on the most inspiring student entrepreneurs. The article naturally focused on Phoenix Innovations and its brilliant young CEO, Serafina. It was accompanied by a powerful photo of her, not in a gown, but in her office, looking confident and in command. He sponsored a campus-wide innovation forum where students could present their ideas. The keynote speaker was Serafina, who spoke with eloquence and passion about the mission of her company. She wasn't asking for votes. She was inspiring her peers. The night of the competition arrived. The university auditorium was buzzing. Ilara, in a desperate, glittering dress, performed a vapid pop song, her voice thin and her smile strained. The other contestants followed with similarly predictable talents. Then it was Serafina's turn. She walked onto the stage not in a ball gown but in a simple, elegant business dress. For her talent portion, she did not sing or dance. She stood at a podium and gave a 3-minute powerful presentation on Phoenix Innovations. She spoke about her dream of leveling the educational playing field. She spoke with a conviction that was more captivating than any song, more graceful than any dance. During the final Q&A, the moderator asked each contestant the same trite question. "If you win, how will you use your title to be a role model?" Ilara gave a generic answer about promoting campus unity and charity events. When it was Serafina's turn, she looked out at the audience, her gaze clear and steady. "If I am chosen," she said, "I will use the platform not to be a role model, but to be a resource. I will prove that the most beautiful thing a person can be is intelligent. The most valuable thing they can possess is integrity. And the most powerful thing they can do is build something that helps others." The applause that followed was not just polite, it was thunderous. It was a genuine, heartfelt roar of approval. The voting was done via a live campus network. As the results were displayed on the large screen, it wasn't even close. Serafina had won by a landslide, securing over 70% of the vote. Ilara, who came in a distant fourth, looked as if she had been physically struck. This was not just a loss. It was a repudiation of everything she represented. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed, Kalen found Serafina by the campus lake. She had taken off the sash and the cheap, sparkling tiara and was holding them in her hands, looking at her reflection in the dark water. "Congratulations," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "It feels strange," she admitted. "But you were right. It wasn't about the crown." "No, it wasn't," he agreed, "which is why I have your real one here." He handed her a heavy leather-bound portfolio. She opened it under the soft glow of a nearby lamppost. Inside were official notarized documents, crisp and smelling of ink. It was a share allocation agreement. It legally transferred 5% of the equity in Phoenix Innovations, an already valuable and rapidly growing company, directly to her name. It was a gift worth a fortune. Kaylin, I can't accept this, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You're not accepting a gift, he corrected her gently. You are claiming what is rightfully yours. This is your company built from your vision. This is the value you created. You didn't win this, Serafina. You built it. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy and gratitude. She looked from the legal documents in her hands to the man standing beside her. The cheap tiara felt like a toy. This portfolio, this tangible piece of her future, felt real. It felt like a throne. He had not just changed her life. He had given her the power to build her own kingdom. For Trio Than, the world had shrunk to the four walls of his small, squalid apartment. The Dieppe Corporation had not been kind. He was fired, publicly disgraced, and now the subject of a relentless internal investigation that was systematically uncovering 2 decades of petty corruption and mismanagement. The debt to the Emperor Hotel, personally guaranteed by him, hung over his head like a guillotine. His assets were frozen. His reputation was toxic ash, and the man responsible for it all was his daughter's 19-year-old ex-admirer. He sat in the dark, surrounded by empty bottles, the air thick with the stench of cheap liquor and stale despair. His self-pity had festered into a malignant tumor of hatred. It was not his greed or his daughter's arrogance that had brought him to this point. In his warped reality, it was Kaylin Vance's cruelty. The boy had taken everything from him, and he had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous animal of all. His mind, sharpened by desperation, sifted through the wreckage of his career, searching for a weapon. He still possessed one thing of value: knowledge. 20 years in the finance department had given him a map of the Deep Corporation's secret landscape. And he knew the location of its most fabled treasure project, Chimera. It was a top-secret research and development initiative, a ghost in the corporate machine spoken of only in hushed whispers among senior executives. It was rumored to be a revolutionary leap in quantum computing, a technology so disruptive it would secure the Deep Corporation's dominance for the next half-century. Trio Than knew that stealing the core data of Project Chimera and selling it to their chief rival, the hyper-aggressive Sterling Industries, would be an act of corporate treason so devastating it would not just wound the Deep Corporation, it would cripple it. It was his final suicidal move. A murder-suicide on a corporate scale. The plan was reckless, but his desperation was absolute. He still had an old low-level security card that hadn't been deactivated yet, a minor oversight in the vast corporate bureaucracy. He called in one last favor from a disgruntled night-shift security guard who owed him for past indiscretions. It was enough. Late on a Tuesday night, Trio Than, disguised in a janitor's uniform, slipped into the gleaming, silent monolith of the Deep Tower. His heart hammered against his ribs, each footstep echoing like a gunshot in the empty corridors. This was the building where he had spent his entire adult life, a place of power he had once revered. Now he was a wraith haunting its halls, intent on burning it to the ground. He reached the secure server room, his borrowed credentials granting him a brief, precious window of access. With trembling, sweaty hands, he plugged in a shielded hard drive and initiated the transfer, stealing the crown jewels of the company he had once served. Miles away, in a sleek, minimalist apartment that served as his secret command center, Kaylin Vance watched Trio Than's every move. He was not watching through a crystal ball, but through a backdoor he had established in the Deep Corporation's security network. On a bank of monitors before him, he saw the security camera feed of the pathetic, disguised figure of Trio Than. He saw the data transfer protocol light up on his network analysis screen. He did nothing to stop him. In fact, he had been waiting for this. A bitter smile touched Kaylin's lips. Project Chimera. He remembered it well from his previous life. It had been the great corporate myth of its time. Sterling Industries, in a stunning act of corporate espionage, had acquired the Chimera data and bet their entire future on it, pouring billions into development. And it had been a catastrophe. The quantum technology was a dead end, a brilliant but fundamentally flawed concept that could never be stabilized. Sterling Industries had nearly gone bankrupt, a blunder so massive it had been taught in business schools for years. The true genius of his grandfather had not been in creating the flawed technology, but in creating the myth around it. The Deep Corporation's real next-generation project, something far more conventional but equally profitable, had been developed in complete secrecy, while their greatest rival chased a ghost. Kaylin had known Trio Than would make this move. A cornered rat will always bite, and this was the most venomous bite he could muster. But Kalen was not content to simply let history repeat itself. He wanted to make the trap even more perfect, the poison even more potent. In the hours before Triothan's pathetic infiltration, Kalen had used his own high-level heir-apparent credentials to access the Chimera data files. The original files were already a siren song of false promise. Kalen, with his future knowledge of exactly which technical hurdles were insurmountable, carefully edited the data. He tweaked the research logs, slightly altering equations to make the unsolvable problems appear solvable. He inserted fabricated test results that suggested a recent major breakthrough. He turned a clever but flawed concept into what looked like a guaranteed revolutionary world-changing technology on the very cusp of commercial viability. He was not just letting Triothan steal bait. He was seasoning it, making it the most delicious and irresistible poison imaginable. A week later, in the private lounge of a smoky high-end bar, Triothan met with a man from Sterling Industries. The man, sharp-suited and predatory, introduced himself only as Mr. Glass. He was the head of Sterling's corporate acquisitions, a polite term for corporate espionage. "This had better be worth my time," Trio Glass said, his voice smooth but laced with impatience. Triothan, trying to project a confidence he did not feel, slid the encrypted hard drive across the table. "This is not just worth your time," he said, his voice raspy. "This is worth your entire company. This is Project Chimera." Glass's professional indifference evaporated, replaced by a flicker of genuine greed. Over the next hour, he and a technical expert reviewed the data on a secure laptop. Triothan watched as their expressions shifted from skepticism to shock, and then to pure, unadulterated avarice. The data was better than their wildest dreams. Kalen's subtle forgeries had worked perfectly. It looked like the Deep Corporation had solved the impossible. "How much?" Glass asked, his voice now a hungry whisper. Triothan named his price, a fortune, enough to disappear and live out his days in luxury. Glass agreed without hesitation. The deal was done. Triothan walked out of the bar feeling a hollow, fleeting sense of victory. He had his revenge. The consequences were not immediate. For weeks, the corporate world was quiet. Triothan disappeared, having been paid and smuggled out of the country. Sterling Industries went dark, reallocating massive resources to their new secret project. At Phoenix Innovations, Serafina and her team were making incredible strides preparing for the beta launch of their app. Her relationship with Kalen had settled into a comfortable rhythm of partnership and deepening affection, the dark undercurrents of his larger war, a silent presence she had learned not to question. The news broke on a Friday afternoon. Kalen and Serafina were in her CEO office reviewing the final launch strategy. A financial news channel was playing silently on a large screen on the wall. Suddenly, a breaking news banner flashed across the bottom. "Sterling Industries, stock plummets 60% in after-hours trading." Kalen picked up the remote and turned up the volume. A flustered news anchor was trying to make sense of the chaos. "We are just getting reports from Sterling Industries," the anchor said, her voice strained. "In a shocking press release, the company has announced the immediate and total termination of a multi-billion-dollar R&D initiative reportedly codenamed Project Chimera. The release cites catastrophic, insurmountable flaws in the core technology, discovered during late-stage simulations. This comes after months of rumors that Sterling was on the verge of a major technological breakthrough. The market is reacting with brutal efficiency." The screen showed the stock ticker for Sterling Industries in a vertical, bloody red nosedive. The anchor went on to detail the fallout, the billions in wasted investment, the firing of their entire R&D leadership, the credit downgrades, the shareholder lawsuits. Sterling Industries had not just stumbled. It had been disemboweled, financially ruined for the foreseeable future by the very secret they thought would be their crowning achievement. Serafina stared at the screen, then turned to look at Kalen. He was watching the report with a detached clinical interest, like a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. A slow, chilling realization dawned in her eyes. The timing, the nature of the technological failure, Triothan's sudden disappearance. It all clicked into place. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "You knew. This whole time. You knew this was going to happen." Kalen turned off the television, plunging the room into a quiet hum of servers and air conditioning. He walked to the large window, looking down at the sprawling city below. "Every action has a consequence, Serafina," he said, his voice low and devoid of triumph. Triuthan chose to commit treason. Sterling Industries chose to act on stolen information. They made their moves on the board. He turned from the window to face her, his eyes holding the cold, clear light of a winter sky. I just made sure the board was tilted in my favor. In that moment, she understood the true scale of the game he was playing. It was not about campus rivalries or petty revenge anymore. He was moving corporate empires like chess pieces, using his knowledge of the future not just to defend himself, but to launch devastating preemptive strikes. The boy she knew was gone, and in his place stood a king, cold and absolute, shaping the world to his will. The collapse of Sterling Industries was a distant earthquake, but the aftershocks rocked Alara's world to its foundations. The news confirmed the last terrifying truth: her father's grand act of revenge had been a pathetic failure. He was gone. A brief, cryptic message was all he left behind, speaking of debts and powerful enemies before his number went dead. Whether he was in a jail cell or a shallow grave, the result was the same. He had abandoned her. She was utterly alone, expelled from the university, burdened with a debt that would shadow her for a lifetime, and haunted by the specter of her own public ruin. Her sanity began to fray. The world, once her adoring audience, was now a hostile stranger. In the dark, paranoid echo chamber of her mind, all of her failures, all of her pain coalesced into two names: Kaylin and Seraphina. Kaylin was the demon who had orchestrated her fall. But Seraphina was the witch who had stolen her life. The scholarship, the success, the title of campus belle, and worst of all, Kaylin's attention, it was all hers. Seraphina had everything that Alara had lost. The injustice of it burned through her veins like a fever, incinerating the last vestiges of her reason. If the world had taken everything from her, she would take the one thing that mattered from the world of her enemies. Her first step was to find Dylan. It wasn't hard. He was a ghost, just like her. Kicked off the team, his athletic scholarship revoked his future, a blank, terrifying wall. She found him drinking cheap whiskey in a rundown bar, his former glory replaced by a surly, resentful bitterness. He blamed Kaylin for everything. Alara sat down opposite him, her eyes glittering with a wild, desperate light. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered a target. "He ruined us, Dylan," she whispered, her voice a venomous caress. "He and that mousy little bookworm he parades around. They're living our lives. They have the money, the success, the fame. They took it all from us." So what? He slurred, slamming his glass on the table. "It's over. He won." "No," Alara hissed, leaning in her intensity magnetic. "It's not over until we say it is. We can get it all back. More than we ever had. Enough to disappear, to start over somewhere new, somewhere they can never find us. We just have to take what we're owed." She painted him a picture, a desperate fantasy of justice and riches. She manipulated his rage, stoked his sense of victimhood, and channeled his broken pride into a single dark purpose. By the time they left the bar, the broken athlete had become her willing, witless instrument. The abduction was brutally simple. They knew Seraphina worked late at the Phoenix Innovations office. They waited in a stolen, windowless van in the deserted parking garage. As she walked to her car, her mind on the upcoming app launch they struck. It was swift, clumsy, and terrifying. Dylan's brute strength overpowered her struggles. A hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her screams. They threw her into the back of the van, and before she could even process what had happened, she was plunged into darkness, the scent of rust and gasoline filling her lungs. They took her to a place on the edge of the city, a place of decay and forgetting, an abandoned steel factory. Its skeletal frame loomed against the night sky, its windows like vacant eyes. Inside, they dragged her into a vast, cavernous main floor, the air cold and thick with the dust of decades. They tied her to a heavy steel chair, the ropes biting into her wrists. Seraphina, though terrified, refused to break. She looked at her captors, at Dylan's jumpy, sweat-slicked face, and Alara's wild, feverish eyes, and saw not master criminals, but two pathetic, cornered animals. Meanwhile, Kaylin was beginning to worry. Seraphina was always punctual. When she was an hour late for their planned late-night dinner, a cold knot of dread began to tighten in his stomach. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He was about to get in his car and drive to her office when his own phone rang, an unknown blocked number. He answered. "Hello." "Hello, Kaylin." The voice on the other end was distorted, but unmistakably, Alara's laced with a triumphant, unhinged glee. I believe you're missing something. Or rather, someone. The cold knot in his stomach became a block of ice. The world seemed to slow down, the background noise of his apartment fading into a dull roar. The memory, sharp as a shard of glass, flashed in his mind. Serafina, her face pale, weeping over his dying body in his past life. His greatest fear, the one possibility that could shatter his cold control, was happening. Where is she? Ilara. His voice was dangerously calm, but beneath it was a tremor of pure primal fear. She's safe. For now, Ilara laughed a grating sound. And she'll stay that way if you do exactly as I say. 10 million, in untraceable, non-sequential bills. And a private jet fueled and waiting at the executive airport, with a flight plan cleared for an undisclosed international destination. You have 12 hours. I'll do it, he said instantly without hesitation. Of course you will, she sneered. You will come alone, to the old Blackwood steel factory off the river highway. If I see a single police car, if I even smell a cop, she dies. Do you understand me, Kaylin? Her life is in your hands. The line went dead. Kaylin stood frozen for a moment, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. The strategist, the corporate king, the cold-blooded avenger, they all vanished. He was just a man terrified of losing the one person who gave his new life meaning. He would not call the police. He knew Ilara. Her sanity was a threadbare cloth, and the slightest pressure would tear it completely. He had to handle this himself. But he was not the helpless boy from his past life. He was a man of immense resources. He made 2 calls. The first was to the head of his family's private security firm, a formidable ex-Special Forces commander. He explained the situation, giving them the location, but ordering them to maintain a 2-mile perimeter, to remain completely unseen, and to move in only on his explicit signal. The second call was to his bank, arranging the cash withdrawal. He packed the money into a large, durable duffel bag. But before he zipped it shut, he activated a small military-grade GPS tracker, no bigger than a coin, and slipped it between the bundles of cash. He was going in alone, but he would not be blind. The drive to the factory was the longest of his life. The city lights blurred into streaks, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Every dark fear, every ounce of regret from his past life swirled in his mind. He had played this game of revenge so perfectly, had controlled every variable. But he had overlooked the explosive potential of pure, irrational desperation. He had pushed them too far. And now Serafina was paying the price. This was no longer a game of chess. This was a hostage negotiation with lunatics. He arrived at the factory just before dawn. The building was a dark, jagged silhouette against the graying sky. He got out of the car, leaving the headlights on to illuminate the main entrance, and carried the heavy duffel bag. The interior was a vast cathedral of rust and shadow. High above, shattered skylights allowed faint slivers of morning light to pierce the gloom. In the center of the cavernous space, a single bare bulb hung from a long wire, casting a sickly yellow glow on the scene below. Serafina was there, tied to the chair, her face pale, but her expression defiant. Dylan stood behind her, nervously gripping a tire iron. And stepping out from the shadows was Ilara. She held a long, wicked-looking hunting knife, its blade catching the dim light. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were wide and bloodshot, and her smile was a terrifying slash in her beautiful face. "You came," she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "I knew you would. You always did come running for me. I'm here for her," Kaylin said, his voice steady. His eyes locked on Serafina. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a flicker of trust. "I have your money, Ilara." He placed the duffel bag on the grimy concrete floor between them. "Oh, I know you do," Ilara said, taking a step closer. She began to pace the knife, flashing in her hand. "You have everything, don't you, Kaylin? My money, my life, my father, and then you gave it all to her." She spat the word, pointing the knife at Serafina. "That plain, worthless little nothing. What does she have that I don't?" Kaylin remained silent, letting her rant. This was the most dangerous phase. He needed to let her vent the poison to manage her volatile emotional state. He kept his posture non-threatening, his hands visible. "I was a queen," she shrieked, her voice cracking, "and you dethroned me for her. You think she loves you. She loves your money, just like everyone else." "You're right," Ilara, Kaylin said, his voice soft, conciliatory. "It was a calculated risk. It was always about the money. So take it. Take the money, take the jet. You've won. Just let her go." His apparent concession seemed to confuse her. She stopped pacing, her brow furrowed. The money was the goal. He was giving her the goal. It was too easy. He slowly started to push the duffel bag towards her with his foot. It's all here. 10 million. Your new life. Dylan's eyes were glued to the bag, his grip on the tire iron slackening. This was what they came for. But Alara's eyes were fixed on Kaylin, a new, more sinister idea forming in her fractured mind. She smiled, a slow, cruel curving of her lips. The money isn't enough, she whispered, the sound slithering through the cold air. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about respect. It's about justice. She gestured towards the ground in front of him with the tip of her knife. I want you to kneel, Kaylin, she said, her voice trembling with a terrifying, ecstatic power. I want you to get on your knees and beg me for her life. Just like you made me beg for my dignity. The demand hung in the air, a final sadistic twist of the knife. Dylan looked uneasy, but Alara was resolute. The faint light of dawn was beginning to filter through the broken windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Time was running out. Kaylin stood motionless, his face an unreadable mask, faced with an impossible choice in the heart of the decaying factory. The air in the factory was a frozen crystalline thing, shattered only by Alara's sadistic whisper. The demand to kneel was the final, perfect cruelty, the ultimate inversion of their past. For years he had metaphorically knelt before her, an acolyte at the altar of his own foolish devotion. Now she demanded the physical act, a final sacrament to seal her victory. No. The voice was Serafina's, raw and defiant. Even tied to a chair with a mad woman holding a knife inches away, she was fighting for him. Don't you dare, Kaylin. Don't give her the satisfaction. Kaylin looked at Serafina, truly looked at her. He saw past the fear in her eyes to the bedrock of courage beneath. She was not a damsel to be rescued. She was a queen fighting from a throne of chains. In that instant, his decision crystallized. This was not about pride. Pride was an indulgence he had burned away in the fire of his first death. This was about strategy. This was about time. His eyes met Alara's. He gave a slow, deliberate nod of concession. As he began to lower himself, to bend his knee to the grimy concrete, his movement was not one of submission. It was a feint. His hand, hidden from her view, brushed the side of his watch, his thumb pressing a small flush button 3 times in quick succession. The signal was sent. You're right, Alara, he said. His voice a low murmur, pitching it to draw her focus, to make this moment entirely about them. He sank to one knee, his eyes never leaving hers. You deserve this. After everything you've earned this moment of victory. He was feeding her ego, pouring honey on the blade of her madness. It worked. A rapturous, triumphant gleam lit her eyes. She took a step closer, savoring the sight of him, the great Kaylin Vance kneeling before her. Dylan, seeing his rival humbled, and the bag of money lying nearby, let out a relieved, greedy sigh. Their attention was a laser beam focused entirely on the drama at the center of the room. They were deaf and blind to everything else. They did not hear the faint crunch of gravel outside. They did not see the dark, fleeting shapes that slipped through the broken panes of the high factory windows, moving with the silent, fluid grace of panthers. Kaylin's private security team, a dozen elite operators led by the formidable Commander Jackson, were in position. They melted into the deep shadows cast by the hulking, defunct machinery, becoming invisible extensions of the factory's decay. Kaylin needed to create a trigger, a single moment of chaos to break the tableau. He needed a distraction. The money, Alara, he said, his voice still low, almost hypnotic. It's all there. Everything you asked for. Your future. My future, she repeated, her voice dreamy. She was completely lost in her victory, her grip on the knife slackening just a fraction. That was his opening. In a single explosive movement, Kaylin lunged forward, but not at her. He kicked the heavy duffel bag with all his strength. It flew through the air, not towards the captors, but in the opposite direction, crashing into a towering, precariously balanced stack of empty, rusted oil barrels. The sound was apocalyptic, a deafening, metallic cataclysm of crashing, booming, and screeching that echoed through the vast space like a thunderclap. For a split second, that stretched into an eternity, Alara and Dylan flinched their heads, instinctively snapping towards the source of the violent noise. In that second, the world erupted. Kaylin moved, a blur of motion. He did not go for Alara. He did not go for Dylan. He launched himself at Serafina, covering her body with his own, just as the first flashbang grenade tossed by Jackson's team detonated with a blinding white light and a deafening report. The effect on the two amateur kidnappers was instantaneous and absolute. Dylan screamed, dropping the tire iron to clutch at his eyes, his senses completely overloaded. Alara stumbled back disoriented, the knife clattering to the concrete. Shadows detached themselves from the walls. Jackson's team moved with brutal efficiency. Two operators descended on Dylan, subduing him and cuffing him in seconds. He was neutralized before he even understood what was happening. Kalen's hands were already working on the ropes, binding Serafina, his fingers sure and steady. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice a shield against the chaos. "You're safe." Ilara, recovering from the initial shock, saw her victory, her money, her entire fantasy dissolving into a tactical nightmare. A primal scream of pure, unadulterated rage tore from her throat. She saw Kalen shielding Serafina, and her fractured mind fixated on that image, the source of all her pain. She scrambled for the fallen knife just as two more operators moved to intercept her. But before they could reach her, she was up, her face a contorted mask of hatred. She lunged not at Kalen, but at the duffel bag which had split open, spilling bundles of cash across the floor. "My money!" she shrieked, falling to her knees and trying to gather the bills. It was a pathetic final act of greed. As Jackson's men finally seized her, grabbing her arms and hauling her to her feet, the last thread of her sanity snapped. She began to fight, to thrash, but their grip was like iron. And so she used her only remaining weapon, her voice. "Let go of me," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high steel ceilings. Her wild eyes found Kalen as he helped a trembling Serafina to her feet. "You did this. You did this to me." The security team tried to drag her away, but she twisted her body, contorting with fury. Her final confession, her testament of envy, poured out in a torrent of vitriol. "I deserved it. All of it. The money, the clothes, the attention. It was all supposed to be. Mine, my birthright. He was my dog, my provider, and I was his queen." Then she came along. Alara's head snapped towards Serafina, her face a twisted snarl of jealousy. "You with your pathetic sob story and your quiet little books. You stole him. You stole my life. I hate you both." Kalen stood with his arms around Serafina, watching the spectacle. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. He had fantasized about Alara's final complete destruction, about the triumphant satisfaction he would feel as he stood over the ruins of her life. He had expected to feel a surge of righteous vindication, the final satisfying conclusion to his long and bitter quest for revenge. But as he watched her being dragged away, a raving, pathetic creature consumed by her own poison, he felt nothing. There was no joy, no satisfaction, no closure. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. The white-hot fire of vengeance that had been the engine of his new life, that had fueled his every decision since the moment he opened his eyes in his dormitory, had finally burned itself out, and in its place was only cold gray ash. He looked at the woman in his arms, at Alara, and for the first time he saw her not as a monster to be destroyed, but as a tragic, broken thing. A soul so corroded by envy and entitlement that she had destroyed herself. And he felt a flicker of something he had not expected: pity. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, a promise of order returning to the chaos. The factory was now filled with the calm, professional movements of his security team and the first responding police officers. The nightmare was over. Kalen tuned it all out. The debriefings, the flashing lights, the questions from the police, none of it mattered. He turned Serafina away from the scene, away from the sight of Alara being forced into the back of a police car. He pulled her close, his hand gently stroking her hair, his body a shield against the harsh reality of the morning. She was trembling, but she was safe. He looked down at her, at the fierce, brave, brilliant woman who had stood by him, who had trusted him, who had fought for him. And in that moment, he understood. His rebirth had not been for revenge. That was just the ugly, necessary work of clearing the rubble of his past. His second chance had been for her. The revenge was a ghost, and he was finally letting it go. All that was left was the future, and she was standing right here in his arms. "It's over," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He was speaking as much to himself as to her. "It's all over. 5 years. To some, it was the time it took to complete a degree, to start a family, to watch the world change in slow, incremental ways. For Kalen Vance, it was the time it took to build a new world from the ashes of the old one. The office of the chairman of the Deep Corporation occupied the entire top floor of the newly christened Vance Tower. It was a space of clean lines, dark wood, and vast panes of glass that offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling city below. The air was still filled with the quiet, confident hum of an empire at the height of its power. It was a universe away from the cramped, stale dormitory room where his new life had begun. Kalen stood before one of the windows, his back to the long, polished boardroom table. He was no longer a boy wearing a man's anger. At 26, he was a man who had earned his authority. The coldness that had once been his armor had tempered into a calm, incisive gravitas. His suit was bespoke. His bearing was one of effortless command, but his eyes as he surveyed the city still held the ancient, weary wisdom of a soul who had lived and died once before. "Their offer is insufficient," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable finality that cut through the arguments of the board members seated at the table. "They are negotiating from a position of weakness, and they know it. Reject the merger. Proceed with a hostile takeover. I want their primary assets integrated into our logistics division by the end of the third quarter." There were no protests. The board, a mix of new talent he had cultivated and old family elders who had been won over by his staggering success, nodded in assent. The young man who had once been the subject of a whispered scandal was now the undisputed architect of their greatest era of prosperity. He had not just saved the family business, he had transformed it. His future knowledge, a tidal wave that had lifted their enterprise to unimaginable heights, while simultaneously washing away the rot of men like Triothan. His assistant's voice came softly through the intercom. "Mr. Vance, Ms. Serafina, the CEO of Phoenix Innovations, has arrived for your 10 o'clock. "Send her in," Kalen said, a subtle warmth softening the edges of his voice. The boardroom doors opened, and Serafina entered. The transformation she had undergone was in its own way as profound as Kalen's. She was no longer the shy, spectacled girl hiding in the library. She was a woman who radiated confidence and intellect. Dressed in a chic professional pantsuit, her hair styled in a way that framed her intelligent features, she moved with the grace of someone completely at home in the high-stakes world of technology and finance. Phoenix Innovations was no longer a student startup. It was a tech unicorn, a billion-dollar company whose educational software had revolutionized online learning. And today, they were finalizing a strategic partnership that would integrate her platform across the Deep Corporation's global philanthropic and educational divisions. She was not his subordinate. She was his equal. "Gentlemen," Serafina said, her voice clear and bright as she addressed the board. She then looked at Kalen, a private, loving smile dancing in her eyes. "Mr. Chairman," Mrs. Serafina, he replied, the formality a thin veil over their deep intimacy. "Welcome. Please join us." The meeting was a symphony of two brilliant minds working in perfect harmony. They spoke of synergy, of scalability, of their shared vision for a more equitable future. They were a true power couple, their partnership built not on secrets and manipulation, but on a foundation of mutual respect and shared goals. Later that afternoon, as Kalen was being driven home, his car paused in traffic. He glanced out the window and saw her. It was a fleeting, unremarkable sight. A woman in a drab waitress's uniform clearing tables on the patio of a small cafe. Her face was harder now, the lines of bitterness etched around her mouth, her once vibrant beauty faded into a kind of weary anonymity. It was Alara. For a brief electric moment, their eyes met through the tinted glass. He felt no anger, no triumph. He felt only a distant clinical pity. He was a ghost from a life she had thrown away, a life she could now only dream of. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, the old familiar venom of resentment, before she quickly looked away, turning back to her menial task, just another face lost in the indifferent churn of the city. The car moved on, and she was gone. Her fate and the fates of the others were now just footnotes in his story. Triothan was serving a long sentence for corporate espionage and fraud. Dylan, implicated in the kidnapping, had also served time and had faded into obscurity. His athletic dreams a distant memory. They were ghosts of the past, and Kalen no longer had any time for ghosts. His home was not a sterile mansion, but a warm, light-filled penthouse that he and Serafina had designed together. It was a sanctuary, a place filled with books, art, and the quiet comfort of a shared life. That evening, they stood on their wide terrace, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The city spread out below them, a glittering tapestry of 1,000,000 lives. "We got the final approval today," Serafina said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The new Vance Benevolent Fund is officially chartered. The first wave of scholarships will go out next spring." Kalen put his arm around her, pulling her close. He had taken the trust fund that Alara had corrupted the very instrument of his past pain, and with Serafina had transformed it into a global foundation. It was their ultimate act of creation, over destruction. "I told you about my past," he said softly, the confession. Something he had shared with her long ago, a truth she had accepted with the same quiet grace with which she accepted everything. "For the longest time after I came back, I thought my purpose was revenge. That hatred was the only thing that gave me strength. It was a fire that burned away all the weakness, all the foolishness of my first life." He looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the dying light of the sun. "But I was wrong," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "The fire was just meant to clear the land. It was never meant to be the final harvest. My second chance wasn't for vengeance. It wasn't about destroying my past or punishing those who wronged me." He gently touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. "It was about having the wisdom to finally see the most precious thing in the universe when it was standing right in front of me. It was about you, Serafina. It was always about you." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of pure, unadulterated love. He had come back from the dead, a soul armed with anger and a thirst for justice. But it was she with her quiet strength, her unwavering integrity, and her brilliant mind who had taught him how to truly live again. He had cleared the path, but she had shown him how to build a road into the future. He lowered his head and kissed her a kiss, not of passionate fire, but of deep, abiding peace. The last vestiges of the angry, vengeful ghost faded away, leaving only Kalen Vance, a man reborn, not into a second life of retribution, but into a single extraordinary lifetime of love. Below them, the city lights began to twinkle on like 1,000,000 new stars being born in the twilight of their new dawn. In the end, the echoes of a past life taught one man a simple, profound truth. Vengeance can clear a path, but it cannot build a road. It can burn down a corrupt and broken house, but it offers no blueprint for a home. A foundation for a worthy future is laid not with the heavy, jagged stones of resentment, but with the gentle, steady hands of integrity, the unwavering strength of partnership, and the quiet, revolutionary power of love. The greatest victory is not in settling old scores, but in creating a new story so beautiful and bright that the darkness of the past fades into an insignificant shadow. To all of you who have followed this journey, thank you for your time and your attention. We hope this story of second chances and hard-won wisdom resonated with you. A tale like this is a reminder that while the past can shape us, it is the choices we make today that truly define us. If you found meaning in this narrative, a like and a subscription to the channel would be the greatest compliment you could offer. It allows us to continue bringing stories like this to life for a community that appreciates depth and reflection. Thank you for your viewership and your support.